What do you get when you take a well-established franchise and you completely change the gameplay from the ground up on a fundamental level? You get one of the most perplexing and bizarre sequels I can think of in gaming. Anyway, this is Spartan Robot Guy. Thank you for logging in. Let's talk nuts and bolts a little bit. Now with this video, I am not going to go into any of the behind-the-scenes stuff that led to the creation of this particular sequel. There's already several really solid videos on this topic, and I'm not going to go into great depth here. It's already been done to death in my opinion. If you're interested, Mac McMuscles in particular did a very good job of breaking it down, but I digress. Anyway, what I want to do with this video is look at the game itself. Seems like the vast majority of the videos and the vast majority of the community dialogues regarding this game have to do with it being a vast departure from the previous two games. That certainly isn't unfounded because it absolutely is, but what about the game itself? I see very few videos where people actually break down the gameplay and look at it from its own merits, and I feel like that's a bit of a shame. It seems like the game itself is overshadowed by this ongoing controversy, almost the way Banjo-Tooie is overshadowed by the controversy around it. So with this video, what I want to do is I want to break down the game itself without looking at the previous games, at least as much as possible. So let's begin. So probably the best place to start is just to look at the graphics and the sound, get the obvious stuff out of the way. I gotta say, I'm actually impressed by how well the graphics hold up, despite being something like 15 years old. That's not to say they're gorgeous, they're not magnificent, but they went for a very particular style. Everything seems to be very mechanical and angular in nature, kind of going with the overall vibe of the game. And because of that, I would argue that the graphics don't look bad. Again, it's nothing to write home about, it isn't anything as mind-blowing as, say, Banjo-Tooie was on the N64, but for 2008, this is pretty good. It holds up very well. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same about the sound design. First of all, there's a lot of recycled sound effects from previous games. Whether or not that was meant to be a callback, I don't know, but to me, I have mixed feelings on that. There are times in the game when they try very hard to differentiate from the previous games, so that just adds to the overall inconsistency of the game. I also have to add on that the music itself is just nowhere near as memorable. Even the remixed classic tracks just aren't as fun and bouncy as the original game. That might have been intentional, again going for that mechanical industrial vibe, but at the end of the day, the music just sounds like, I say this jokingly, but it's really kind of true. It almost sounds like it's a dollar store off-brand Grant Kirkhope attempt. So probably the biggest part of the entire game is the vehicular construction, so let's talk about that a little bit. I remember the first time I played this game, I absolutely hated it. I thought it was way too difficult, the learning curve was just too much. Playing it now as an adult though, I can appreciate just how intuitive it is. There's certainly a learning curve, but once you have the construction system down, it feels very, very intuitive. And the sheer amount of creative potential is absolutely insane, especially for a game in 2008. Like, this was the same time frame when Flash-based physics games were some of the best physics games you could find. But here you have so much creative potential. You could spend hours and hours just tinkering with all the different vehicle parts. And having a test track literally just right there in the main hub world was a really nice quality of life touch as well. Today, playing it, I almost get a similar vibes to the construction in Tears of the Kingdom, where it's based on taking components and snapping them together, but a little bit clunkier than that. I also have to respect just how realistic they tried to make the vehicular physics. These vehicles function and behave almost identically to the way they actually would in the real world, as much as possible at least. So yes, it wasn't a very popular thing among the fans, but with the benefit of hindsight, the vehicular system is absolutely fantastic. I'm impressed that this came out as early as 2008. As you could probably guess, most of the puzzles in the game involve vehicles. Mind-blowing, right? Anyway, I do like that there is a twist in that you often have to construct the best possible vehicle for certain puzzles, but at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do with vehicle-based platforming. I think that's why it's just not as common as you'd expect. Close to 3/4 of every challenge in the game is either a race, carrying somebody or something, or knocking a certain vehicle over. That's not to say they don't shake things up, and that's not to say that there isn't variety, because frankly, the amount of time you can spend experimenting with the different vehicle parts definitely adds some really interesting risk-reward into it. But at the end of the day, it's just too repetitive. There's just not enough variety in the puzzles. And that was one of the things that made Banjo-Tooie in particular so fantastic, was the sheer amount of variety. You know, one level you were battling a coal monster. The next level you were going through an undersea maze. Like, that was one thing the games thrived on in the N64 era, was variety. And that's something that, in my opinion, missed the mark in the 360 era. A relatively minor complaint that I have personally is that anytime there is a bit more open-ended element to it, for example, early on there is a volcanic eruption taking place and you have to figure out what to do with these large volcanic rocks that are being thrown around. The game doesn't have you figure out that you have to throw them in the ocean. The game literally spells out in the objective, push them into the water. And to me that just makes it a little bit too easy. Half the fun of the first two games was figuring out what to do to solve these puzzles. It wasn't as simple as, hey, do this. You actually had to figure out what to do to solve these puzzles. So taking that extra puzzle element out of it, to me, just kind of defeats the purpose. Like, why bother having a puzzle like this if you're going to tell me how to solve it? Anyway, the puzzles aren't inherently bad, but they're just very repetitive. And to me, that's the absolute worst thing Banjo puzzles can be, is repetitive. So the final thing I want to talk about is just the overall tone of the game. To me, this is the most inconsistent part of the game. There are times I can't tell if they're trying to pay homage to the classic games or if they're trying to straight up mock them. There are moments when they're making really fun and really clever nods to story elements and characters and moments from the previous games, but then there are also parts where they straight up criticize them. Like, multiple times it's mentioned that collecting jiggies and collecting notes feels outdated. Main characters say, why are we doing this again? And to me it comes off as more mocking than anything. I'm well aware it might be that self-aware dry British humor coming through again, but here it just feels a lot less consistent. There's also moments, such as early on, where the log character literally says, you don't need your classic moves anymore. Understandably, that's really upsetting to a lot of people. It's like, not only are they completely changing the gameplay, but they're rubbing it in your face. Like, you're not going to need all these classic moves anymore. No talent shot, no grenade eggs, none of that fun stuff that we loved about the previous games. Just right away, right in the first 5 minutes of the game, a character telling you that feels like a gut punch. So what were they trying to do with the tone of this game? Were they trying to make fun of the classic games? Were they trying to pay homage to them? It's impossible to tell. And to me, the overall game suffers for that lack of consistency. As the name of this video implies, my big goal with it was to answer that question. Is Nuts and Bolts deserving of the amount of hate it gets? And I gotta be honest, with this retrospective, I find that question very difficult to answer. I won't deny for 1 second that this is not a worthy sequel to the classic N64 games. I won't deny that this game, changing the gameplay so much and then rubbing it in players' faces, was an absolute gut punch to longtime fans. I won't deny that it was very poor taste for them to take this vehicular game and make it a Banjo game. I won't deny any of that. But at the same time, there's enough good here where it's not an inherently broken game. It's not a bad game by itself. I think its biggest problem was being a Banjo game. If it was not a Banjo game, if they had not slapped the Banjo IP on this game, it would probably be a minor classic. Between the very intuitive physics stuff and the really interesting stylistic choices, there's enough good here where it could have been a minor classic. So, is Nuts and Bolts deserving of the hate? I'll leave that up to you, my viewer, to decide, because frankly, it's such a controversial and such a difficult thing to do objectively. So, let me know what you think in the comments. I hope everybody enjoyed the video. Please feel free to like and subscribe, and I hope everybody has a fantastic holiday season. Take care.